Thanks for joining us for another episode of Living Transplant. Today's episode is all about exchanges between donors, donor families, and transplant recipients. And in honor of Living Donation Week 2020, we are recording this episode live. Our guest today is Michael Ward, Provincial Family Services Advisor at Trillium Gift of Life Network. Thanks for joining us today, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Michael, what is Trillium Gift of Life?
So the Trillium Gift of Life Network is the agency of the Ministry of Health, which is now Ontario Health, as we all know it, or close to it. And we are the organization responsible for organ and tissue donation and transplantation in the province of Ontario.
And what is your role at TGLN?
So I am what they call the Family Services Advisor, responsible for making sure that donor families post donation are looked after, for lack of a better word. I think it's mostly so that they realize that once the donation process is over, that we haven't forgotten about them. You know, their decision to donate, their decision to support their loved one doesn't go unnoticed or unattended to beyond that day. So that takes on different responsibilities for my department, where we focus on aftercare, which can be anything from a phone call to reaching out by letters, which we do. For example, early on, within about 3 or 4 weeks of donation, we'll call it an official letter, comes from me, and it talks about the outcome. So it's even though the family would already have an idea as to what the outcome is and how many recipients and where certain organs went, that letter comes as an official piece. But it also gives me the opportunity in that letter to introduce donor family services.
Right.
And that in the future, you're going to probably hear from me from time to time. And it gives them an opt-out. So in other words, if they don't want that,
Right.
past that outcome letter, they have an opportunity to, kind of say, it's like unsubscribe.
Right.
And I think in the whole time I've ever been in this role, it's only happened once. So I think that, families, they want to know, because in that explanation is like, if a recipient reaches out, do you want to know about, do you want to make contact back? Those kind of pieces. And we touch base at 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, just by way of letter, just to say we're thinking about you and if there's anything you need.
Right.
Do you think that people opting out or unsubscribing from that is like a way of grieving? Although it's only happened once, but like, would you expect it to be some form of grieving process?
I think initially maybe people have that thought, and then as they think about, as it's explained in that letter, it's like, they may have those moments, yes, in grief, where that intensity is so new that it's like, I don't want anything to do with it. It's over. But
Right.
I think the positivity of, the donation piece is what keeps them attached.
Right. And where does letter writing come into your meetings with them? Like, is it something you offer to contact the recipient family, or is it just something you kind of tell them about and wait for them to ask if they can write a letter?
Yeah, some donor families will ask right away, but in the 6-month letter, it talks about writing to recipients, and we give them that information in that letter. And the reason why we wait 6 months is mostly because the feedback from transplant programs, at least at the 6-month mark, recipients know where they're at. Like they're either well on their way, to recovery. And so within that 6 months, they're adjusting as well, and it just doesn't put the pressure on them. But some donor families will reach out. Some donor families will have already heard from a recipient at that point. And so there's no time frame. It can happen. It can happen early, or it can happen, later.
Right. And roughly how many letters would you say go through TGLN per year between donor families and recipients?
So I always give the number of 1,000 pieces because there's about 500 coming in. In other words, the letters that are coming in either from recipients or donor families. And then there's obviously 500 going back out again.
Right.
So the handling is about was about 1,000. It's amazing, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Do people ever write and not get a response? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, often. It's
That's hard.
but that can be based on a lot of things too. I think for donor families, as an example, most of them can't wait to know, right? Which
Right.
makes sense. But they also know that recipients, again, are
Also
recovering,
grieving and-
from the transplants.
Yeah.
There are certainly instances where I can tell by the date of the letter, and I look at the date of the transplant, that a recipient, you would think that they're writing it in their bed before they're discharged from the hospital. It's wanting to shout it from the mountaintop,
Yeah.
kind of situation.
Right.
And then others will wait to their first year of their transplant, like their anniversary. And I think often, as I try to explain to donor families, if they think or ask why they haven't heard from them, it's because the post-transplant coordinators, who know their patients better than anyone else, give great information. They will say to a recipient, we don't want to tell you not to reach out, but we understand too that your donor family is going through their year of firsts without their loved one. In other words, that birthday has to happen, that anniversary, a holiday. And so you being mindful of that can be helpful sometimes. But that's not to say that if you want to write, that you can't, because I have donor families that just can't wait to hear, right? So it runs the gamut of, just depending on the situation, how the donation came to take place, whether it was a sudden death,
Yeah.
in that it was a tragedy. And so, yeah, we're all different that way. I think each of us would probably have a different answer for what we think would be a realistic time frame around a letter going out or a letter coming in.
Right.
For sure. So walk us through the process as if we are, I guess, who would be if we were working with you? We would be a donor family, right? Correct?
Well, generally, it's recipients that reach out first.
Recipients.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I'm a recipient. What do I do?
There we go.
Okay, we'll pose it that way. So recipients are aware of the process based on information that would be with their post-transplant coordinator. So if they said, I want to reach out to my donor family, there would be a similar process as from my end to their end. So there's a knowledge of what they can or shouldn't write to disclose their identity.
Right.
Now, some kind of forget because they get carried away, but
Right.
we can talk about that later, how we redact and edit that out. So they bring that letter into their transplant coordinator or post-transplant coordinator. They then send it directly to me. And then because I have the knowledge of where the donor families are, I then make sure that letter, is suitable to go out. And then I send it directly to the donor family.
Michael, is there only one of you?
Correct.
Wow.
No, I'm kidding. I'd like to say that.
Oh, I was like, wow, like the amount of letters that you're getting.
Yeah,
like,
we have. There's two of us.
Okay.
And so we split that process
Okay.
because there's other things going on, obviously, that are just not correspondence letters. So we
Okay.
we keep busy that way for sure.
Yeah.
And how has COVID affected letter writing and letter exchanges?
I would say that it really hasn't. But in the beginning, as everyone else, was trying to absorb what was going on around us, personally and professionally, I think there was probably maybe a couple of weeks where we noticed that, the volume, was a little bit down, but then it kind of went right back up again. And I think people then realized, maybe this is the opportunity to reach out, both ways. And so we also, in about mid-April, sent a letter through our newsletter to our donor families that we do 3 times a year. Just a little note that talked about, the vulnerability of a recipient and how they might be feeling. And so I'll share a paragraph or two of that letter that went out. Now more than ever, we know how crucial it is to stay connected with others. We've been receiving correspondence between recipients and donor families during these days of isolation. Playing a role in the exchange of words of gratefulness and encouragement is a wonderful part of our family services program. It reminds us all that the initial altruistic act of human kindness does not end at donation. Transplant patients are particularly vulnerable and isolated during this pandemic due to their unique health challenges. We know that hearing from you, their donor family, would lift their spirits. A few words to say you are thinking of them and wishing them good health would be an enormous boost right now. And perhaps knowing you have given comfort to them may give you a boost as well. And then we just remind them where the guidelines to writing that letter, is. Yeah. So the response to that, we could tell there was a bit of a spike for those that follow the newsletter, and it just kind of carried on. So that's a wonderful thing that COVID hasn't diminished the want, need, and desire of those two sides.
Well, I guess it wouldn't really anyway, because these people aren't meeting up in person, so it's always been this kind of
distanced
form of communication. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
For sure.
Yeah.
Have you read any of the letters that have been? Well, I mean, obviously you have. Are there any letters you can share with us that have been written during COVID?
Yeah, for sure. So this particular one was interesting. The timing had nothing to do with the letter that we sent out.
Yeah.
This actually kind of spurred on the idea to send that note out in the newsletter. This one's a little longer, but this came from a donor family to a recipient. I shared this also network wide, like in our organization, because I just thought nobody's in the office. Every once in a while, I'll send an internal letter just to just kind of let everybody know this is the work we do as an organization, and it's just a good reminder of no matter what department you live in, here's the baseline.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So this comes from a donor family. To our dear recipient, we are so happy that you are doing so well in your last note to us. It is so very helpful to our family when you write. These past 3 years have moved both quickly and painfully slow. There are the times that make us pause and reflect deeply. This week has been one of those weeks. Not for the loss of our daughter, but for the real-time day-to-day events as they unravel and make us all pause in disbelief. We want you to know that as we all navigate this unknown future, you are very much in our thoughts and hearts. We know for recipients that this is always a priority to protect your health. Please know that we have our arms of love and support around you. We don't know you, but knowing of you makes us think of how we would support all family members through this time. You are most definitely an extension of ours. We can't take away your fear or anxiety around staying healthy, but we can most definitely promise you that we are following all of the recommendations that will help stop the spread of this virus. We hope that it helps you, knowing that your donor's family is on this journey with you. Your donor would have been leading the charge for our family if she were here right now. Always the organizer and the one to remind us of how we can shift between having to be right or be responsible. We can assure you that in our small corner, we are being responsible and doing our part. For you, all recipients, our family, and our community. With so much love, health, and courage, your donor's family.
Perfect.
Pretty succinct.
Yeah.
Doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah.
And to think that they just knew to reach out.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that there's other donor families who have thought the same.
Mm-hmm. Have letter exchanges always had the same type of role or process? Like even maybe not during a pandemic, but hearing about different viruses or illnesses or during the flu or any type of situation in the past? Has it always been like that, where a donor family may reach out to their recipient and be like, hey, I know it might be a really scary time, or is this kind of something that we've just noticed through COVID?
Yeah, I would say just noticed through COVID, because we've never really had
anything this
big.
Yeah.
It stopped all of us in our tracks.
That's right.
Yeah, and that affects us all.
Yeah.
Equally,
Made everybody like literally look back in their life and be like, hold on just a second. Yeah.
Lots of reflection for sure.
Absolutely. So what's been the biggest change since you started your role at TGLN?
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Come on. You guys, of all people, should know that in healthcare, we live in the world of acronym.
Oh yeah,
Right?
100%.
But TGLN is not so much a mouthful.
Yeah.
Just the email address. Pretty much volume. And I think where that stems from is more donors equal more transplants equals more recipients.
Right.
Right. And as long as donation increases, which is the goal, right?
Yeah.
That's why we do what we do. That will be a natural progression for those to increase. And I think too, there's also a culture of understanding, whether it's just better education that people, they know to do it, right? Even in some of our communication to donor families and through, the education to recipients from their post-transplant coordinators, it's the right thing to do. That acknowledgement piece. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy or that everybody's going to do it, but certainly the awareness that back and forth can take place keeps growing. So
I don't know if you said this already, but I'm just wondering when and how the letter exchange program started, and if it was a struggle to try and allocate resources and support for letter exchanges, and how did people kind of defend the need for donor families and recipients to be in touch with each other?
So Trillium has been around since the early 2000s, and when I came, it was a well-oiled machine as far as correspondence and letters. Before us, there were two other organizations that were doing a little bit of that, but not on the same scale, and I think that was based on resource. So when Trillium came into being, they made sure that Family Services Department was there, and made sure that that process was a priority.
Michael, do you see any changes coming in how letter exchanges, the process of how letter exchanges happen in Ontario?
I knew you were going to ask that question. So probably, yes, I did, because it's probably the most asked question by donor families.
Oh, okay.
So I'm kind of hiding it in how you've asked the question. But it's mostly about changes in being able to meet, right? And so, or how much information that they can share in those letters. Changes to the act that allow for, when I say the act, the Privacy Act, that would allow for donor recipients to meet. In Ontario, it's embedded in legislation. So that's different than other provinces where the organization creates the rules or the policy around information that can be exchanged. And so British Columbia, Alberta, Nova Scotia are now saying we're going to allow for that. Now, there will be criteria that will surround the ability as to how that goes. And I'll share that because people are always so interested.
Yeah.
And if and when the day ever comes that that opportunity can happen in Ontario, that criteria may look like they have to at least exchange 3 letters within a year.
Okay.
Because that also gives someone in my position who can share it with someone else, within the organization, that this seemingly looks like a healthy, relationship.
Right. Yeah.
And then, beyond that, there would be, the sign off, on both sides that this is really, what they would like. Right. Just not quite sure what that is going to look like when the day happens. And I know that my colleagues across the country who I talk to weekly on all different reasons, because as you know, organs do leave the province.
Right.
And so we have that connection piece to different provinces. They're treading very carefully and slowly, but it's happening. And so I foresee other provinces following suit, and it makes it difficult because now we're seeing stories in the media about people meeting and not just people who met maybe by chance. And so, people say, well, how can that happen? Why are we not able to do that? And so you go through the explanation one more time around why that can't be here. And it is disappointing because I think there are certain situations that it would just be lovely if they could connect.
Right.
I mean, that's, my thoughts on it, but I also know that there is, there's reasons to protect that,
Yeah.
identity as
Can
well.
you explain some of those reasons? Because I feel like
would volume be one of them? Because there are so many transplants that
resources would be, there would have to be a designated program to support that if we were gonna support that. So whether it included social work, counselors,
Right.
because it's one thing for a program to say that they're going to begin this, but they I'm sure need and know that they need to have the infrastructure to support it.
yeah.
And if something went awry, which things can, whether, just relationships like anything else, who then is responsible for that, going south? And so we can say, or any organizations could say, well, you signed off that, you're on your own now. We're not responsible for what happens. But that's still really difficult because at the end of the day, we facilitated the beginning of it. So it really needs to be taken slowly here, just by the sheer number of donors and recipients that we have in Ontario.
Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm. Are there any risks?
Oh yeah. I feel like I kind of asked that already, but yeah, I guess we've talked a little bit about the problems with meeting one another in person. I guess there would also be risks to meeting in person as well, but putting that aside, are there risks in exchanging letters?
I wouldn't use the word risk so much, but it is a good word because I think when any of us put ourselves out there in that emotional vulnerability piece, and I'm thinking about donor families more so when I answer this, that there's a risk to writing and not hearing back, for example,
right.
or there's a romantic notion of what all recipients must be like,
right?
And so they can receive letters back and forth that it's I wouldn't say disappointing, but they might think, oh, I didn't, that's not who I thought the recipient might be,
right?
Based on what the information that they've shared, not to identify themselves, but just about. And this is interesting because it goes back to a conversation that I have with post-transplant coordinators all the time. They'll sometimes give me the heads up if they say, hey, I'm sending you a couple of letters today. You might just want to take a look at that one. I ask them to just, scale some information back around, their thoughts on religion, for example, which is always one that we need to be careful about. And I obviously talk to donor families a lot about when they're writing to recipients. You never know who you're writing to and what their personal belief system is.
Yeah.
And so that's just something to keep in mind. But it's also for some donor families a two-edged sword because it reminds them, obviously, of the loss of their loved one. But almost all that I talk to say that pendulum swings very, very quickly to the joy to receiving a letter from a recipient. And so that goes back to the timing when I was talking about the year of firsts. They're saying, why are we not hearing from any of the recipients? And I'll say, well, they're being mindful of you, but they also want to be well. They want to be able to write to you, thank you, and say, my life has changed. And not all recipients, in my understanding, have the ability to make those statements within a couple of months.
Right.
Yeah. And so in fairness to them, and again, and through the education, thank goodness, of many post-transplant coordinators that I talk to, they do ask me, your message back to your donor family donor families needs to be this, because they will protect their patients, the recipients, at all costs. And so it's just an important message that donor families understand about the recipients too.
Yeah. In one of our interviews, we had asked he's a recipient about writing letters, and he explained the grieving process of having to accept the fact that someone had to die in order for him to live. Right. And being able to write that letter was or even just like wrap his head around.
It's daunting.
Yeah, of course. It's just like,
how do you get over the guilt?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and he called it survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
He was talking about that survivor's guilt and just being able to come around to the idea of writing to his donor, which
that's
seems
one of the
like
conversations.
heavy.
That's one of the conversations I have with donor families too, is that as well as telling them about the recipient being respectful of knowing they're going through their year of firsts and the loss of their loved one, that there is a guilt. They know what had to happen in order for them to live.
Right.
And most donor families, in fact, I would say the majority would go, we get it.
Oh, for sure.
But I also say, as time goes by, because there are many recipients who just don't know where to start. And it has nothing to do with not being grateful, not wanting to reach out, but they just don't know how to just put that pen to paper and start.
I get that.
And so I will say to a donor family, if you reach out, because we have the guidelines on our website as to how to write to your recipients. Sometimes that's giving them permission.
Right.
Because you write to the recipient and it's, they may be ready to hear from me. I didn't know what to say. They've given me a little bit of information as to, how I hope I'm doing well. And it's interesting because, 9 times out of 10, when donor families send letters, and they usually send multiples, if there's multiple recipients, they may send the same letter generic, and then I'll send it to the different recipients. There's always a response. And so that just feeds into that theory for me that the recipient was just waiting to hear first so they could make contact, knowing that the donor family was ready to hear from them.
That's interesting because I feel like in living donation, it's the other way around, where they want the recipient to reach out to them. Well, I guess in living donation, when it's anonymous donation or non-directed donation, they can only exchange one letter each. And then I feel like a lot of donors that I've spoken to, they don't want to, they want the recipient to reach out to them first because they don't want to make the recipient feel pressure that they have to be grateful or anything like that.
This question might not be allowed, but when the donor does have multiple letters that they give out and the recipient is writing back, does the recipient in that sense mention, or are they allowed to mention which organ they got?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So they say, I got my kidney from whatever, right? Okay.
And that's key to keeping me organized.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because
then you can be like, which one was this? No.
Yeah, and the cover letter that would go along with the piece of correspondence that the recipient has written to the donor says, I will say in that cover letter, here's a letter from your son's, heart recipient.
Okay.
Or your daughter's kidney recipient,
okay. Yeah.
Those kind of pieces.
Mm-hmm. Is there
that way when they're writing back, they'll say, dear kidney recipient.
Yeah.
Right.
And they can keep in line who they've heard from and, those kind of things.
Do you find that depending on which organ they got, the donor family it's harder for them to receive based on which organ?
I don't know about harder, but certainly when there is a heart recipient, I think we all know, in our culture and, the heart is just representative of so much. And so that is most definitely the recipient that when there is a heart recipient that donor families inquire about or really want to know or hear from. They are happy and to receive letters from all recipients. But if I was answering that question accurately, it would be that is the organ that
really stands out. I get that. After reading some of the letters, does it ever frustrate you hearing one side or another side or being the middleman? Does it ever frustrate you knowing both sides of the story?
Yeah, I don't know about frustrating, but it speaks to maybe that thought, if our Privacy Act was a little bit different, where these people could come together again, it'd just be lovely. This would work.
Yeah.
But then I'm quickly reminded that there could be a situation that maybe couldn't work.
It couldn't work. Yeah.
And maybe shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel like we see it a lot now. Well, transplant in general seems to be changing, and living organ donation as well, with how people find one another on social media. So either finding your living donor through social media, or like I feel like there's a bunch of Facebook groups now where people are trying to, you know, find their donor family and their recipient. Like people will post the date of death or the date of their transplant, you know, kind of looking for their match. What are your thoughts on people who kind of like circumvent the system to meet this way?
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens often.
Do they tell you? Do
Oh,
they tell you? And
yeah.
you're like, I met my donor family. And
For
you're
sure.
like,
Yeah,
I tried so hard to protect that.
I would get it opposite. I would get the donor family would say I've met
My
the recipient. But I have often received the heads up from a post-transplant coordinator to say, just want to let you know that they found their donor family. And so at the same time, neither the transplant program or TGLN would ever confirm or deny that.
Right.
Right. Because that we just can't.
Right.
But
and you guys would never intervene either.
Nope.
It's kind of like a
Nope.
hands-off situation. Like you guys did this
Interesting.
on your own.
Yeah.
We are not getting involved type thing.
We certainly don't encourage or discourage it, but there are easy markers that will show both sides whether that in fact is their recipient or their donor or their donor's family. Because if they've written back and forth a couple of times, and as Courtney has said on social media where there are Facebook groups and all that kind of stuff, they just have to post their letter and then there's your
Confirmation.
confirmation, which is, we know transplant programs and TGLN, we both know that that's generally how it goes.
So when reading some of these letters, do they ever affect you personally?
I wouldn't say personally, but they stop you in your tracks someday. And I think mostly for me, it's always peds, right? And it's often we don't talk about, we think of donors as being adults mostly, right? But in a perfect world, that would be the case maybe. But we have a lot of pediatric donors. And so though the letters between the parents of the recipient to the parents of the donor are just, you need to like get up from your desk and go take a walk generally after reading them, because the emotional exchange is there's nothing like it.
Do you have any?
I did bring a couple. One, interestingly enough, which I've shared often, and with permission, I might add, was from a young girl, like very young girl, who was in grade 3, and in handwritten, as a little one in grade 3 would be writing. It's certainly legible, but you can tell that it's in a child's handwriting. So those are always like, oh man,
Here we go.
Like,
Yeah.
exactly.
Grab the tissues.
Yeah, that's exactly it. What's interesting is she is a heart recipient, and she's talking about how everything is going for her, but it's her one question that kind of really threw me because it's just so cute. So I'll read this letter. To my donor family, I'm in grade 3. I'm always smiling. Checkups are great. I love my cat and dog. I like Legos and Barbies.
Wow.
I have a question about my donor. Did my heart come from a boy or a girl? And so in talking with the transplant coordinator about this, she'd never played with Lego much. And not that girls can't play with Lego, but she just like,
learned, like, now I
so
like
she
Lego.
thinks, oh, that must be a boy thing, which we all know it's not. But it was just so cute for her to write, I like both. So
What
What does this mean?
yeah, was my donor a male or a female? So then she closes, thank you so much. The greatest hero I never knew was the organ donor who saved my life. Yeah.
Sorry. That's really cute.
Yeah, so
One
cute.
day.
Oh, Britt.
Yeah, welcome to my world.
Aw.
The best job in the world, I will add. This next letter, I'll read a paragraph. This is from a recipient's mom to the donor family, and just one of the paragraphs, which is a great reflection of how content can be in a letter, and just imagine how wonderful this would be to be received by a donor family from a recipient mother. Today, our daughter is thriving and is our greatest joy. She enjoys watching cartoons, playing with toys, going for stroller rides, swinging on swings at the park, and listening to music. She likes to babble and make noise and seems to have her own special language. She has her own unique personality, is very strong-willed, and can be a wee bit stubborn at times! ! We are blessed to have family in close proximity, and they love spending time with our daughter. We understand that with our joy, unfortunately, comes sorrow for your family. We can never truly understand how you must have felt on that day. We can never even hope to thank you enough for the decision that you made to save our daughter's life. Saying thank you just does not seem enough, considering the amazing gift that you provided to our family. And that's coming from a donor family, or from a recipient of a little one that was just months old. Ugh. And so just the gratefulness, the humanistic piece. And I just, in this particular situation, I had been talking with the parents of this donor quite a bit. So they were in a place where they just couldn't wait to get this letter. And in most situations in PEDS, I will give or make a phone call to the donor's parents saying, this letter has arrived. It's coming. Where are you at? Are you ready to see it? And in most cases, it's like, yes, send it on. But I think it's just a responsible thing to do to make sure that they have the opportunity to take a breath before they go to the mailbox.
I never even thought of that. So, this might be a dumb question, but maybe not. Do you email them, or do you actually mail them? Or do you get them in an email, or do you get them by letter? Because it's 2020, so
yeah, right. No. So for sure, that's a great question, because now a lot of people do email the letter.
Right.
Why? That hard copy letter is nice, because sometimes a lot of them are handwritten, a lot of cards with a note. But sometimes people who are just so prone to be on their computer, it's just like they can write it, they can get those feelings out, those words out in a easier format, and it's right there, and they can just press send.
Okay, so you said that when it comes to like the pediatric letters, you maybe confront them and say, "Hey guys, are you ready for this?" But is that not always a thing? Is it automatically maybe you get the letter and you send it almost right away, or do you always give them? You don't give them. It's not like a normal thing or a thing to give a heads up and say, "Hey, I got the letter."
To like everyone else,
no, it just goes like immediate. Okay, so it's like pretty authentic.
That's just my approach. That's actually just a personal approach that I've just said at the very least. And it's my approach, but I actually heard it. They said, it was lovely to get this letter. And this was early on when I started. We could have just we would have liked the heads up. My wife was alone. She opened the mail. I was at work. And it's like, I get it. I apologize. And they weren't really they were not upset. He was just saying FYI, that would have been better. We love the letter. I just would have been nice to have it and read it together, not knowing that she just opened it because it's like, oh,
what's this?
Yeah, Jillian's sending me something. So it was a learning. Yeah, that was a learning curve for sure.
I can only imagine that writing the letter, whichever side you're writing from, is pretty daunting. Do you have any advice for people that are hoping to write, and what are some of the tips or the advice that you would offer them?
Yes. So for recipients, if and when I'm asked, the answer is pretty basic, and it's just like if you can't put a bunch of words together, then just a thank you. And we do receive cards that's all it says. It says, thank you. And donor family would rather hear that
than nothing
at all. Yeah.
It'd be hard if you don't hear anything.
And so the number one tip
sure.
is to acknowledge the death of a loved one.
Yeah.
If I'm going to give like a tip
Yeah.
right out of the gate. And then you can go on to talk about, how grateful you are for the gift, that they said yes. Talk about how it's changed your life. I don't have a lot of interaction with recipients, but there are some that I do because we have recipients that may have been transplanted in Ontario, but they actually live in another province now. So they really don't have the same connection ability to their post-transplant program because they're probably being seen by, a specialist in the province that they live. And so then we just we have that one way street back to us. And what that does, it just speeds it up. So it's like there's not a delay from where they used to be seen.
Right.
Coming to me, like it just eliminates.
What are some of the longest letter exchanges that you know of?
And is there a limit to the amount of letters that someone's allowed to give? So those are two big questions. Sorry.
So we have donor families and recipients that have been easily, especially in the kidney programs, that have been exchanging letters for 20 plus years.
Awesome.
And thank goodness they do it regularly, because some donor families move and then they might make a change of address or everywhere, but they don't think about TGLN. And so if a recipient who, finally has the ability to reach out and thank their donor family, and for some, realistically, it can take years to do that. Sometimes we can't forward their letter because we don't know where the donor family went.
Yikes.
Our last known address was this, and then it comes back.
Sad. That's sad.
Yeah, it is. It's unfortunate because that maybe that donor family would have really
Love to hear.
And as well, disappointing as well for the recipient, because something could have been started as well. And I'm sure they may be wishing they had written earlier, but that's no fault of theirs because they just weren't in a place to do it.
Right. Yeah. So is there a limit? There's not a limit then.
No.
Per year?
No, not at all.
No, just keep going if you can or want to.
Most that have that ongoing, it's, for sure, like the anniversary around the transplant, some recipients will call that like their second birthday, those kind of things. There's always a major surge in December at just before Christmas.
Right.
It's usually like end of November. It's like there's generally a lot going back and forth, and it's equal. People reaching out, and they will sometimes use that date versus their transplant date. I think just to take away from, as it was explained to me once, the date of the death. So let's turn it into like, a holiday, not assuming that everybody, celebrates Christmas.
Right.
And especially in this day and age, which also leads me just to a quick point around why some donor families don't hear from recipients, because sometimes there's language barriers that just don't allow them to do it.
Yeah.
And not that I can ever, confirm that that's the case or why they haven't heard from.
Right.
But in speaking with some post-transplant coordinators, they'll say, the likelihood of them writing their donor probably isn't going to happen because there's just not the support, to be able to do it.
That is also unfortunate.
Yeah. And just going back to your question about like, limits of letter exchanges. So for living organ donation, for non-directed donors and their recipients, they can only ever exchange one letter each. So we have, should we read ours? We have like a copy of, the only letters that these people will ever send back and forth with each other, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from the donor to the recipient family. So they donated to a child. Dear recipient and family, I hope this letter finds you and your family doing well. I don't know what it has been like for you and your family to live with a failing liver, but I imagine it hasn't been much fun. It is my sincere hope that your recovery is going well and that you will soon be able to enjoy life to its fullest and will have the chance to spend many quality years to come growing and being with family and friends. I feel honored to have been able to offer a little piece of me in the hope that you will have a life of health and happiness. That is all the reward I need. It was absolutely my pleasure to do this. I am fortunate that my recovery couldn't have been better, and if I could do this again, I wouldn't hesitate for a moment. I'm the type of person that is always looking for an opportunity to help people. Sometimes it's just a little thing, like paying for the order for the person behind me at Tim Hortons drive-thru, or putting some coins in the cup of a homeless person. Sometimes it's something more. Whatever it is, I try to make the world a better place, even if just one act of a kindness at a time. That's what brought me here. I am so pleased to have the opportunity to help someone like yourself. And while I certainly hope it helps you, it also allows me to give back. Perhaps someday you can pay it forward in your own small way, and we can all help make the world a better place. I wish you a speedy recovery and a long, happy, healthy life.
Thank you. I feel like I'm the recipient
Amazing.
now, and I'm going to read back my response.
Okay.
Dear donor family, it has taken us some time to write this letter because there are no words that could ever express our gratitude and appreciation. You have given us the best gift possible, the gift of life, and for this we could never thank you enough. Living with liver disease was hard and scary at times, but immediately after the surgery, we saw remarkable health changes. We now have a healthier and happier child, and this is because of you. Thank you so much. We received your letter and brought tears to our eyes. It is truly amazing that there are people like you that want to make this world a better place. And what better way to do this by saving the life of a child? Your act of kindness and selflessness has inspired us to make a difference. We want you to know that our family is committed to making a difference, and we will help this world a better place. We are so glad your recovery went well. There are many times during and post-surgery we wondered how you and your family were doing this. How we're doing. It is nice to know that you are doing well. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you and your family for being our donor. We will be forever grateful to you, and we love that a piece of such a kind and wonderful person will be in our little one forever. We wish you a life full of happiness and good health. Love always, your liver recipient and family.
So You've been doing this obviously for a while. Are there any letters that you just can't forget?
Yeah, that just like stick out that you're like, oh my goodness, that one really...
Yeah, the one that I read for sure, it's a favorite because of that question, right? Because it's just so innocent and childlike. I think I don't have a favorite because I'm amazed every time one comes across my desk. You know, whether it's from an adult or a pediatric patient, it's what's next. And so what that does for me is there are some standouts as like the one I shared, but it just keeps adding to the story for me as to just how people in that altruistic moment rise out of their situation and say yes to donation. Mm-hmm. And so getting a little bit post that process where I get to learn a little bit about them because they're writing back and forth. It just amazes me. So every letter for me in its simplistic form, or even some that are long, and there have been some that are like 7-8 pages. It's just, I have the greatest job in the world.
Yeah. I won't speak for all nurses, but I will speak for myself that I don't feel like I get to see the humanistic part of it as often. Like, we're very busy and we don't really get to talk to them as often as I think we'd need to in order to get that experience. So I think what I've learned today is I can't work in peds because I wouldn't be able to do it, but amazing to hear those stories and just hear that other perspective outside of these walls. It's a lot.
Well, it's a reminder that life is fragile, and because, and not to focus on the pediatric piece, but it's just one of those reminders of, the innocence of an expectation of, those that have a family and children. And then it's like, what just went wrong?
Yeah.
Whether it's the health of a potential recipient or losing, a child. What's amazing is that organ and tissue donation can create something positive, and it is, because that's the word that's been used to me, out of a terrible loss, and that is what helps in the grieving process. And from my standpoint, in my department, that's our aim, is to make sure that donor families don't feel like on that day it's over, and we get to try to help them along and walk with them on that journey.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Mm-hmm. You get a little piece of this too, right? Like the letters.
No, I don't have anything to do with letters. I interview a lot of living organ donors, so I get to hear like really, really happy stories. Like there's not really, there are some tragic ones in terms of what inspires people to become living donors.
Right.
But for the most part, I deal with just like very, very happy stories. Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't say, I think I'm like in between both of you, because I maybe not hear the stories, but I definitely see them. Mm-hmm. I like the before and afters, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, thanks so much, Michael.
Thank
you for having me.